Thank you, thank you. I've got to be frank with you. For most of the last 30 years, very few people cared too much about what I do. I was just an obscure, absent-minded academic working on some rather abstract foundational ideas in AI. And the idea that we could build AI, that we could build computers to do tasks that humans require thinking, that idea was just so remote that it was mostly the stuff of Hollywood movies. But things have changed. Now you can't open a newspaper without reading multiple stories about how AI is starting to succeed. The computers can play Go better than any human. The computers can play poker better than any human. And just to contradict Dr. Lee from this morning, that wasn't deep learning. That was good old-fashioned Bayesian reasoning that was able to play poker, a game of probability, better than any human. Computers that can read X-rays faster, more accurately than any human doctor. Computers that can translate English into Mandarin. So, not surprisingly, many people are starting to worry, well, where is this all going to end? Now, you don't need to worry. The computers are not going to take over anytime soon. We've got 50, 100, or even more years before machines will be as smart as us. So this is now my opportunity for another plug for my new book, 2062. That's the year to think about. Not because I told you. When I wrote the book, I surveyed 300 of my other colleagues, other academics working in AI, have been working on the problem for many years. And that's when they estimated that machines would be as smart as humans. Now, there was a huge amount of variance, uncertainty in their answers. It might be 100 or 200 years. It's probably not 2062, but it's good for a title of a book. In fact, 8% of them said it would be never. So the average, any estimate where, well, at least one person says never, the average would be never as well. But the median answer was 2062. 50% said before 2062 and 50% said after 2062. It's a really challenging problem, of course. I'm part of the optimistic 92% who think that we will sometime in the next century or so build machines that will be smarter than us. It would be terribly conceited to think that we couldn't do that we were as smart as you could possibly be, that machines couldn't be smarter than us. I mean, every time that we thought we were special, that the sun went around the earth, that we were different from the apes, we were wrong. Copernicus, Darwin came along and proved that we were wrong. And computers have many natural advantages over the human brain. The computer never needs to forget anything. What was I talking about? Computers will think faster than us. Computers work in the gigahertz, billions of times faster than the human brain, which works in single-digit hertz. And of course, computers are massively parallel, but we're working on that. We don't build computers still as parallel as the human brain, but we're slowly getting there. Computers, the human brain is limited by the size of our skull. That's limited by the size of the birth canal. We can't have any bigger heads and be born. Computers don't have that limit. Computers are not limited in power consumption. Our brain uses 20 watts of power. That's the 20 of the 60 watts that our body generates. That's as much as we can afford to give to our brain. Actually, the brain uses the most energy of any organ in our body. It uses more energy than our heart. But computers don't have that limit. We can tap into almost unlimited amounts of power in the cloud. So there's many reasons to suppose why computers would eventually, in the next 100 years maybe, become smarter than us. I still have a very healthy respect for the human brain. It's the most complex system in the universe that we know of by far. nothing approaches the billions of neurons, the trillions of connections, the millions of years of evolution that have given us this, this human brain. So, like most of my colleagues, I don't think it's going to take 10 or 20 years, despite what Ray Kurzweil would think. It's going to take a bit longer than that. The machines we can do today are not that intelligent. They don't have any desires of their own. They just do what we tell them to do. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is often the problem. We haven't thought carefully through what we've told them to do. And anyone who's had the pleasure to program a computer knows how literally minded computers are, that they are the most literally minded devices that we've built as humans. But they can solve narrow tasks today, often at superhuman level. And that's got profound consequences for our society. Even if we never get to superintelligence, even if we can only build machines as smart as we can build today, it's estimated there are perhaps less than 10,000 people on the planet today, people like me, with a PhD in AI. So I get a call from the media pretty much every day to help them understand, where is this taking us? It's got to the point now when I go home, my wife doesn't ask me if I was interviewed by the media today. She just wearily asks me, so who was it today? And most common of all, the journalists want to talk about this new topic, AI and ethics. I recently had a journalist from Woman's Weekly come to talk to me about this very topic. And so that night when I went home and told my wife, she declared it must now officially be peak AI and ethics. But last year when I was taking some of these calls from the media, I had a real moment of revelation I want to share with you. I was taking calls about Google's latest demo of Duplex, their new personal assistant at the I/O conference. I'm sure many of you will have heard it. It's very impressive. A computer can make a telephone call and book a table at a restaurant or a haircut, something simple. It's only a simple conversation. It'd be very easy to fall it, but nevertheless, I was very impressed. It ummed and ahed just like a human being. And of course, many journalists were naturally concerned about how computers were pretending to be humans. There are plenty of Hollywood movies to suggest that could end rather badly. I then started to take calls from other journalists about Amazon's face recognition software, which was to be used at the upcoming royal wedding to identify guests without their permission. Many journalists were understandably concerned about issues of privacy. And I must admit, just to stop that story for a side, just an aside about face recognition as a whole, I mean, as Cheryl was saying this morning, the problem with AI is the technology is completely dual use. There's plenty of good things you can do with it, and plenty of bad things you can do with it. There's plenty of bad things that people are doing with face recognition software. Just look at what's happening in China with the way that they're suppressing religious minorities using face recognition and other sorts of software. There are, of course, good things you can do with face recognition software. There are a number of police forces in the US and elsewhere that are using it to stop child trafficking. You can't scan the faces on the internet by eye. You have to get a computer to do it. But I must admit, the more we go down this road, the more I'm starting to think the small number of good uses are just so outweighed by the potential Orwellian uses of face recognition that I do wonder if we should just do face recognition at all. Okay, but back to my story. Journalists were ringing me up about Amazon's face recognition software. I was still taking calls about Google's Duplex. And that's when I had my moment of revelation. Actually, it was two revelations. The first one was that now it's a full-time, 24/7 job just answering journalist questions about the latest ethical fails of Silicon Valley. Now when journalists ring me up and ask me for my comment on the latest AI story, I have to ask them, which particular AI story typically am I talking about? Because there's typically multiple stories about multiple ethical fails breaking at the same time. And second, despite the fact that we were talking about this as this new problem of AI and ethics, most of it isn't new. Most of it is old-fashioned bad behavior. Knocking on someone's door and pretending to be someone you're not is bad behavior. Any company that employed people to knock on your door and pretend to be someone that they're not would be behaving badly. So getting a computer to metaphorically knock on your door and pretend to be someone else, a human, is behaving badly. Now, a colleague working in Google on ethics did tell me that management was advised that they should put a disclaimer up front, that they should warn the caller that this is a computer, not a human. But, the management didn't listen, and that is rather troubling in itself. But more fundamentally, the whole problem, it's deceptive by design. Why do you and ah unless you're trying to fool people? As a second example, I'm going to go on to another Google example. Google Photos. A couple of years back, it was discovered, distressingly, that Google Photos was labeling black people as gorillas. Now, this, of course, is deeply offensive and racist and something that no one at Google, for sure, even wanted to happen. We don't need anything in the way of new ethics to understand this. The problem here is that computers don't have any cultural knowledge. They don't have any common sense. They can't understand today, for sure, and for quite a long time in the future, how insensitive and how inappropriate it is to label black people as gorillas. And there's no easy fix to this problem. In fact, Google did fix this problem by removing the label gorilla from all photos. I haven't heard the gorillas complaining yet that they're not being labeled, but they're not being labeled anymore. And as a final example, I'm going to have to talk about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. Now, much of the discussion, like we heard earlier today, has been about privacy, about how Facebook enabled Cambridge Analytica to steal private information. And that, of course, is bad behavior. And we should be rightly outraged about it. But there's another side to the Cambridge Analytica story, which surprisingly isn't talked about as much, which is that that information, that private information, was then used to manipulate how people vote. Now, Facebook actually had 2 dedicated employees embedded in the Cambridge Analytica offices, helping them buy adverts to manipulate how people voted. So it's pretty hard to understand the surprise on Facebook executives' faces when they testified before Congress, the British Parliament, about what happened. They were a very active player in manipulating how people voted. And I don't have to remind you, manipulating how people vote has been bad behavior for thousands of years, ever since the ancient Greeks, ever since we started voting. We don't need any new ethics to decide this. Ladies and gentlemen, technology lets us behave badly, faster, cheaper, and easier, but most of it is just good old-fashioned bad behavior. There is, though, just one aspect of AI that does create some new ethical challenges. And that's autonomy, the fact that we're giving machines the ability to act on their own. And we see this, 2 things I want to talk about: autonomous cars, autonomous weapons. An autonomous car is driving along, goes around the corner, has to make a life or death decision as to who to kill. This, of course, is the famous trolley problem. And we don't have any easy answers to this. We can't simply survey the public, as some people have suggested. People say one thing and do another. Election polls have demonstrated this quite convincingly recently. And we can't just observe what people do. All of us behave in ways that we shouldn't do. So there are no easy answers. Actually, interestingly, the trolley problem was introduced 50 years ago to try and inform the debate around abortion, to save the mother or to save the child. And we don't have any easy answers to this. We don't have any easy answers to the ethics of autonomous cars. But we've actually faced this problem for 100 years without coming up with an answer. Every time you've got in a car, you might have to answer the trolley problem at a moment's notice. We just don't. But no one has written down, there's no highway code anywhere on the planet that will tell you what to do. Interestingly, I've actually asked colleagues who program autonomous cars, and the trolley problem is an irrelevance to them. There's no subroutine that they write that tries to solve the trolley problem. The top-level control loop is essentially avoid things if you can. If you can't, brake as hard as you possibly can. That's it. The car doesn't understand the world enough to be able to make the sorts of distinctions that people are talking about in trolley problems. So the trolley problem perhaps tells us more about society's concerns than anything to do with the concerns of the automobile industry. We also see the challenge of autonomy in something that I'm very passionate about, which is autonomous weapons, or as the media like to talk about them, killer robots. The problem with calling them killer robots is that that paints the picture of this guy, the Terminator, in your minds. Every time I talk about AI, of course, they put pictures of Terminator in the mind, so here's the picture of the Terminator. But that's the wrong picture. This guy is 50, 100, or even more years away. We don't really have to worry too much about him today. No, we're talking about much simpler technologies, things like this. This is a drone. You've seen them flying above Afghanistan and Iraq. It's not today fully autonomous. There's still a soldier in the loop that's controlling it, but it's a small technical leap to remove the soldier, replace them by a computer, have a computer make all of the final decisions. The UK's Ministry of Defence have said they think it's technically possible. They have a demonstrator that proves it, the Tranis drone. I completely believe them. These are technologies that are very near every theatre of the war, in the air, on the land, on the sea, under the sea. Autonomous weapons are being developed by militaries around the world. Now, these will be the perfect weapons of terror. They'll be weapons of mass destruction. Thousands of my colleagues are very concerned about where we're going. Since we're being optimistic, I will be optimistic, things are, in Europe at least, slightly optimistic. 26 nations have called for a preemptive ban. And most recently, the European Parliament has called to support a ban. So I'm optimistic if we are going to make progress, progress will be driven by pressure from Europe to force the US, the Chinas, the Russias to actually take action on this. One of the problems of autonomous weapons, though, is the accountability gap. Who is going to be held accountable when they make mistakes? It can't be the programmer. They'll deny, they'll say it was the data it was trained on. The militaries will say the enemy spoofed it. The enemy will say we're allowed to use camouflage, we're allowed to spoof weapons. Who is responsible? Let me make it quite clear. Machines cannot be held responsible. We cannot, and I doubt we ever will, build moral machines. There are legal, ethical, and technical reasons. The technical reason, or let me start with at least one of them, is that morality is a complex product of our nature and our nurture. All of us have different moralities. My twin brother has different morality to me. Morality needs to do with a messy, complex, chaotic world, and we're not going to be able to program that in the next few decades for sure, and we're going to have autonomous weapons well before that. That's a legal reason, but I think actually there's more profound ethical reasons. For thousands of years, we've been studying philosophy, and we haven't come up with a precise set of instructions how to live a good life. Silicon Valley is not going to succeed in the next generation, where a problem which has defeated hundreds of generations of the finest thinkers on the planet. And finally, there's a simple legal reason that we can't and won't build moral machines. Machines cannot be punished. They're not sentient, they're not conscious, they don't suffer. If you turn them off, it doesn't matter. Yes, we hold legal corporations accountable, but we're discovering the challenges and problems with that. Let's not make that same mistake with AI. I fear that most of the discussion about AI and ethics is just theatre. It's like the security theatre we put up with at airports. I'm not sure that taking off our shoes anymore makes us any safer, Actually, I'm not sure it ever made us any safer. But similarly, much of the discussion about AI and ethics is a distraction from holding to account the people and the corporations responsible for using the technology to behave badly. When companies behave badly, government should regulate, the judiciary should prosecute, the workers in those companies should protest, and citizens should walk away and take their business elsewhere. And if I'm being optimistic, I can see that happening in Europe. We have, as an example, the GDPR, an example of how governments can regulate to give us better privacy. We have the EU courts slapping down billion-dollar fines on companies that are behaving monopolistically. We have the workers of Google and Amazon around issues like Project Maven and face recognition protesting and changing how those companies act. And some of you may have even logged off of Facebook. This is only the beginning of holding the technocrats to account, of assuring they hold up to the values of our society. Values that are clearly articulated already in places like the UN Declaration of Human Rights, in the United States Constitution, by the European Court of Human Rights, and all the other moral frameworks, written and unwritten, formal and informal, that already guide our society. If we do so, I'm optimistic. The future can again be bright. Thank you.